What we're going to do is a few touch-ups that you might run into on your walls. And so one of the first ones is just a dirty smudge or mark on the wall. And basically the main thing to do with that is to take a very well wrung out sponge, lightly dampen that area and remove the mark that's there. Another repair that you might have would be just light marks or light scratches on the surface. Same thing, very similar to the mark or mar, just a little bit of dirt on there. Just take a well wrung out sponge and remove any of those scratches that are usually just on the surface. And then lastly would be an actual mark, or this happens to be Sharpie. That would take a little bit more work. Fairly well wrung out sponge with a little bit of moisture in it, and you're going to dampen the area. So you can actually remove that mark that's in the surface. All of these repairs are on a sanded finish right now, so it makes it a little bit easier as far as how you would approach it. But if it was a trowel finish, I would just follow that up with a trowel that matched the surrounding area. So once that's dry, we'll come back and we'll blend in any of the slurry that's there. The next would be more of a marker mar that's got some depth to it, and also we'll be doing a repair of a scratch. Same thing, it's actually in the surface. First thing you want to check would be that it has nice clean edges to the repair area. If you need to, you can use a tool or an implement to cut or clean up those edges so you have something to grab into for the repair. Just like with this one, we've got a couple of smaller sections that aren't very deep, and so I'm just going to make those a little bit more of an obvious repair that I can come back and fix. The tools that I'm going to be using are a small trowel, a plastic implement of some sort. That could be a yogurt lid or margarine lid. This one happens to be a Bondo scraper, and a sponge, maybe a spray bottle, and potentially a bucket of water. Along with that would be dried material that you reserved from the original application. That way you have material that matches what's on your walls. Any new material that you might have potentially might not match exactly. First thing I'm going to do is take my wet sponge and some of the dry material. I'm going to take that to the wall and lightly dampen the area that I'm going to be repairing. I'm going to utilize a piece of material that's easily going to fill the repair with some additional material left high of the surface. Take that dry material, I'm not wetting it very much, I'm just getting enough moisture on the outside layers to adhere to the damp wall, and then we'll work it into the surface. So now I'm going to make sure that the repair is damp enough and pressed into the repair area enough that it fills that zone. Once I've done that, I take my trowel and very carefully shave back to the face. As I encounter some drier areas, I'll redampen it, and just with very light pressure, make sure that it's even with the surface. Now, I'll just make sure that that dries. On the next repair, we've got a long gouge out of the wall, and I'm going to demonstrate an alternative way to the way I did it last time. I still approach it in the sense that you're going to use a wet sponge, you're going to dampen the surface, and use dry material to further repair. Lightly dampen the surface that you're going to repair. Not a lot of moisture, just enough material to fill the repair and then some, so it's proud of the surface. So now I'm just going to make sure that I wet it and press it in the surface into the crack and then leave it alone. We'll come back when it's a little bit drier and sand it off. If while you're doing a repair at any point, if you need to speed up the drying, you're welcome to use something like a hair dryer or a fan and accelerate the drying. So within this repair, we had several different areas that we tried different things. One was just a mar or a mark, a light scuff on the wall. I was just using a very well wrung out sponge to clean it off. As you can see right next to it, we had a much heavier area that had Sharpie on it, and therefore we had to do a bit more to pull that off the surface. And as such, there's a bit of a haze that's left on the surface, and I'm going to show you how to take care of that. Here we had some light scuffs before, and just with a very well wrung out sponge, you take away that light haze and the mark that was left behind, and now we might have a light haze, and for that we just take a very well wrung out sponge and clean it off. This time, however, I'm going to make sure that it's very, very well wrung out because I don't want a lot of water going back onto the wall. So I have my very well wrung out sponge, I just go back to the wall and then very lightly, evenly dampen that surface with very light pressure. Everything is evenly wet, and basically burnish in and get rid of those light hazes. I'm using irregular patterns, and really all I'm trying to do is just clean off that light haze that I created by wetting the clay and working it out. Also, as a quick note, something that you can sometimes do for a much smoother finish is just use a microfiber cloth, something like this, and just lightly wet it with a spray bottle instead of getting it saturated. And that will allow you to just take off that light haze or cream that might have developed when you were doing your repair. The overall work on the wall is the same, but you're using a microfiber cloth and a spray bottle instead of a sponge and bucket. Alright, so now this is the repair that we did where we had a little bit of a mark and then a line. I cut in that line, filled the repair with some dry material and then shaped it flush. You can see exactly where that repair was because you've introduced additional clay and exposed some of that slurry that you would get from reworking it. So now what we're going to do is, because this is a lightly sanded finish, we're going to use a sponge and just sponge out the repair zone. Go to your bucket, get your sponge, wring it out fairly well. Not quite as dry as it might be for a slurry. We're going to slightly dampen that zone. And just make sure in re-wetting it that your texture is matching areas around it. And so in this case you might be able to see some marks here, light texture around it, and that will blend in quite well once it's dry. So now that I've got a good match, I can use my hair dryer, dry out that patch, and then go to the next step. I have a dry repair. Right here is the repair zone. You can see texture around it. It's got a little bit of a light haze surrounding it. So now I'm going to take a very, very well wrung out sponge. Get as much moisture out of there as I possibly can. And just with really light pressure, just feather out that area, deepen up the color again, get rid of that light haze that's developed from the repair. As I'm doing removing the haze, I'm moving out much further away from the repair than I originally did, and that helps to blend everything together and keep the color more consistent. So now that this repair, we've dried it with the hair dryer, it's ready to go in, and you can see that I've left it proud. And on this one, I'm going to use a sanding block, just a standard sanding pad, find a drywall sanding pad, and lightly sand back to the surface. You're going to mark up the walls lightly around it, but now that it's all even and flush, I can re-wet and rework it. So now we've got it sanded and everything's flush to the face. With this being a trowel finish, I'm going to wet it and re-trowel that surface. So I'm going to use a spray bottle, lightly wet it. Explain what that is. And what I'm doing is I'm basically just reworking. This is a rubber Bondo tool. You can get them in packs of 3. And I'm wetting and compressing that surface to give match the surrounding areas with the tool. If I use a steel trowel, it's very easy to overwork the repair zone and leave a mark. And just like before for the other repairs, you know, with this light white haze that really shows up, the repair, because we've compressed it, has a little bit more color to it. But I mean, it's very lightly. So I'm going to very lightly wet that zone. Just work that haze out. If there's some low spots in the repair, you can choose to fill those in the same manner that I did before. But in looking at the texture around it, there's some other additional marks that were there from the original application. I'm just going to leave those in this repair. And now we can let that dry naturally, or we can use the hair dryer to dry it off. So hopefully that helps you do just general repairs that you might run into from either nail holes or moving furniture around. Somebody walking down the hall with a hammer accidentally scrapes it lightly, or even just scuffs from the occasional soccer ball that's kicked around your house. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. So hopefully you have dried out material left over from the original project to do your repairs. If for some reason you don't and you're trying to do a repair in a very visible area and you want it to match exactly, many times what you can do is a couple things. First, I will check behind switch plates and other areas that might have some chunks of dry material. If that doesn't produce anything, you can go to an area that's hidden, say behind a cabinet or a large TV cabinet that's not going to be moved very much. You can even go behind a picture that you can pull material from to do your repair. And then if you have material that comes a little bit later that doesn't match exactly, then you can do a repair on the area where you removed material originally. So the main thing to do with that is make sure that you have something to scrape your material onto. A trowel or a putty knife or something that you don't mind using to scrape material off the wall. Don't use your good trowels to do this. Use like a base coat trowel or a less obvious putty knife. So now we've come into our wall, and we found an area. We removed a picture frame, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to wet that area with a spray bottle. And just very carefully remove some material that could be utilized for a repair, depending on how large your repair is. If it's just a little small picture frame repair, that might be enough. If it's a larger repair, you might have to go back a little bit further. And another thing to note is you want to go slowly into the surface, because if you take off a large amount, you don't have color in your base coat, then it will become difficult. It will become difficult to avoid getting to your base coat material. See, now that we have a decent amount of material, we can go do our little repair. If for some reason our repair zone could just be smoothed out or sponged out to match the area around it, you can do that as well.